They say justice wears a blindfold in Meridian City's 7th District. The truth? It doesn't wear one. It just looks the other way on purpose. You're about to watch a story that will make your stomach drop and your fists clench. It begins with an arrogant officer who has never once been told no, a rookie who knows something is wrong but doesn't know how to say it, and a black woman in a worn olive jacket just trying to mind her own business on a Tuesday afternoon. They looked at her and saw nothing. They decided she was nobody. They grabbed her, hit her, cuffed her, and threw her in a cell like she was garbage they were taking out. But here is what Officer Ronald K. Harrison didn't know. What none of them knew. The woman bleeding on the floor of their booking room was the woman scheduled to stand at the front of their precinct briefing room in less than 14 hours. Their new chief inspector. And she was already building the case. The heat in Meridian City doesn't break until well after noon. By 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, the asphalt on Delray Avenue shimmers like a warning. The kind of heat that makes people irritable, makes them move too fast, think too slow, and mistake patience for weakness. Sarah Collins moved through it like she was completely unbothered. Because she was on foot. No badge, no weapon, no rank visible anywhere on her body. She wore a worn olive jacket over a plain white tee, dark jeans, and scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back tight in a bun at the nape of her neck. Neat, efficient, no nonsense, just like the woman herself. She had no makeup on, no jewelry, not even a watch. To the untrained eye, she looked like a woman who worked double shifts somewhere nobody noticed. A woman who carried her problems quietly and asked nobody for help. That was by design. Sarah Collins had been a law enforcement officer for 19 years. She had run 3 precincts, survived 2 corruption investigations as the investigator, and had the kind of institutional memory that made internal affairs directors nervous in a good way. She had transferred to Meridian City on assignment, hand-selected by the Office of the Deputy Commissioner to do one thing: clean up the 7th District from the inside out. Her first official day wasn't until tomorrow morning, 0800 sharp. But Sarah Collins never walked into a room she hadn't already studied. So today she walked her new district in plain clothes, reading it the way a doctor reads an X-ray before surgery, looking for exactly where the damage lived. She had just stopped into Harmon's corner store on Delray for a bottle of water when she heard the cruiser pull up. She didn't turn around immediately. She paid for the water first. Officer Ronald K. Harrison was 44 years old and had been wearing a badge in Meridian City for 17 of them. He was broad in the shoulders, deliberate in his movements, and carried himself with the specific, suffocating confidence of a man who had never once faced a real consequence. His face was the kind of permanently set expression that wasn't quite a frown but made everyone around him feel like they had already done something wrong. He had commendations he hadn't earned and complaints that had been quietly buried. 3 supervisors had tried to rein him in. All 3 had eventually transferred out. Harrison was still here. He pulled his cruiser into the lot beside Harmon's and cut the engine. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Officer Dana Reeves, 6 months out of the academy, still getting used to the weight of the belt, still trying to figure out which version of the job was real. The textbook version or the version Harrison ran every shift. Harrison got out slowly, scanning the street the way he always did, not looking for crime exactly, looking for opportunity. His gaze moved across the lot and found Sarah standing near the entrance of Harmon's, water bottle in hand, eyes on her phone. She didn't look up when the cruiser pulled in. She didn't acknowledge him at all. Harrison's jaw tightened. To him, that wasn't indifference. That was a problem. 12 o'clock, he muttered to Reeves, nodding in Sarah's direction. Civilian loitering. No purchase. Probably working the block. Reeves squinted. Sarge, she's got a drink in her hand. She's literally just standing there. You want to learn something today or not? Harrison said, already moving. He crossed the lot with that slow, weighted walk, the one that was meant to be felt before it arrived. Sarah heard the boots on the asphalt. She didn't look up. She was finishing a text to the district attorney's office regarding a preliminary evidence review she'd requested for her first week. Harrison stopped 3 feet from her and crossed his arms. You live around here? Sarah looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, sharp, and completely unbothered. She looked at Harrison the way someone looks at a mildly inconvenient piece of furniture. I don't see how that's relevant, she said. Calm, flat, honest. Harrison's nostrils flared. I'm asking the questions. Do you live around here? I was just leaving, Sarah said, capping her water and turning. I didn't say you could leave. Harrison's hand shot out and landed on her shoulder, hard, arresting, the kind of grip designed to remind a person how little they weigh against a man with a badge and 17 years of permission. Sarah stopped. She turned back slowly. Her eyes moved from his hand on her shoulder to his face. She said nothing for a moment, just looked. Take your hand off me, she said quietly. Something shifted behind Harrison's eyes. Something ugly surfaced. Failure to comply, he said. Suspicious behavior. No visible identificación. I don't need to carry ID to stand in a parking lot. Wrong. He stepped into her space. You fit the description of a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. I need to see ID. Now. What investigation? Sarah asked, her voice still level. Harrison didn't answer because there was no answer. There was no investigation. There never had been. He reached past her and slapped the water bottle out of her hand. It hit the asphalt and rolled under the cruiser. Hey, Sarah started. Destructive behavior, Harrison announced to no one. Disorderly conduct. He reached for his cuffs. Don't. Sarah's command voice came out before she could stop it. Low, precise. The voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed by rooms full of people. It froze Reeves mid-step. It made 2 people at the bus stop across the street look up. It made Harrison's face go a shade of red. Sarah had only ever seen on men right before they did something they couldn't take back. He drew his hand back and brought it across her face. Open palm, full weight, the kind of hit meant to humiliate before it hurt. The crack of it echoed off the storefront. Sarah's head snapped sideways. Her lips split against her teeth. She tasted copper. The world tilted for just a moment, the way the world does when something violent and sudden interrupts it. Then it steadied. She turned her head back slowly and looked at Ronald K. Harrison. Her cheek was already swelling. Her lip was bleeding. Her eyes were perfectly, terrifyingly still. You just ended your career, she said. Not loudly, not emotionally. Simply the way a person states a fact they are entirely certain of. Harrison laughed. It was a short, hollow sound with nothing behind it. Cuff her, he said to Reeves, already turning away. Reeves stood frozen, her face pale, her hand hovering over her cuffs like it belonged to someone else. Officer. Sarah's voice was quiet. You don't have to do this. Look at what just happened. You know what this is. Reeves. Harrison's voice dropped to a warning. Now. Or you explain to the review board why you refused a direct order. Reeves's eyes were wet. Her hands were shaking. She mouthed the words I'm sorry before she stepped behind Sarah and brought the cuffs around. They clicked tight. Too tight. Harrison grabbed Sarah by the arm and walked her to the cruiser without another word. He opened the back door and put his hand on top of her head the way officers do, the small, practiced gesture of control, and pushed her inside. Sarah said nothing as the door slammed. She sat in the hard plastic seat and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She looked out the window at the lot, at Harmon's corner store, at the bus stop where two witnesses had already pulled out their phones and then put them away again, not sure if what they'd seen was worth the trouble. She memorized the cruiser number, Unit 7 Delta 4. She memorized the timestamp on the clock on the dash, 2:17 p.m. She memorized Reeves's badge number, visible in the passenger mirror. She noted that Harrison had not read her rights, had not stated the specific charge, had not activated his body camera. She noted all of it, filed it, let it settle into the organized architecture of her memory where it would wait, patient and exact, until she needed it. She did not want to be released. She did not want this to disappear quietly into the nothing that Meridian City's 7th District had made out of 100 complaints before hers. She needed to be processed. She needed the paper trail. She needed her fingerprints in the system under tonight's arrest record, her photo taken under the fluorescent lights of the booking room with a split lip and a bruising cheek, Harrison's name attached to every line of it. She needed all of it official, documented, and impossible to bury. Because Sarah Collins had not transferred to Meridian City to be anyone's victim. She had transferred here to be exactly the kind of reckoning that men like Ronald K. Harrison had spent 17 years convincing themselves would never come. The 7th District Station was a low, wide building on the corner of Delray and Marsh. Gray brick, buzzing fluorescent signage, American flag hanging limp in the dead afternoon heat. Harrison pulled around to the back entrance, the Sally Port, and killed the engine. He walked her in through the service entrance. The booking desk was manned by a desk officer named Sergeant Carla Webb. Mid-40s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, the kind of woman who had seen enough in this building to have developed very precise instincts for when something was wrong. She looked up when Harrison brought Sarah through the door. She looked at Sarah's face. The lip, the cheek, the posture. Something in Webb's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her pen stopped moving. "What we got, Harrison?" she asked, her voice giving nothing away. "Disorderly, obstruction, resisting, failure to ID," Harrison said, dropping his paperwork on the counter. "Jane Doe. No wallet, claims she doesn't have ID. Process her and put her in holding. I'll write the report." He walked off toward the locker room without another word. Webb looked at Sarah. Long and quiet, Sarah looked back. In the brief, private window of Harrison's absence, Sarah gave Webb the smallest, most precise nod, not of submission, of instruction. "Process me," the nod said. "All of it. Official. Tonight." Webb held Sarah's gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she stood, slowly picked up her scanner and said, "Step forward, please." They took the prints. The system cross-referenced. The database populated. Webb stared at her screen. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't speak. Then she turned and looked at Sarah Collins standing on the other side of the booking desk with a split lip, cuffed wrists bearing deep red welts, and the calmest face Webb had ever seen on a woman who had just been hit by a cop in her own parking lot. "Ma'am," Webb said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper, "the system is showing a personnel flag." "I know what it's showing," Sarah said. "It says." "I know what it says, Sergeant." Webb swallowed. Her hand, resting on the edge of the desk, had gone completely still. "Not yet," Sarah said, her voice quiet and absolute. "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. You'll want to be in that briefing room." Webb stared, nodded once, slowly, like a person absorbing news they will spend the rest of the night processing. She walked Sarah to a holding cell at the end of the corridor, unlocked it, and held the door. Before she closed it, she paused. "Do you need medical attention, Chief?" "Sergeant," Sarah said simply, settling onto the bench. Webb nodded. She closed the cell. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and spent the rest of her shift making very sure that every piece of tonight's booking documentation was correct, complete, and time-stamped to the second. Down the hall, in a holding cell that smelled of concrete and old regret, Sarah Collins sat with her back straight and her hands folded and her split lip already stiffening in the recycled air. She was not afraid. She was not broken. She was not even angry, not in the way Harrison had wanted her to be. She was something colder and more permanent than anger. She was ready. And in 9 hours and 43 minutes, when the doors of the 7th District's main briefing room opened and every officer in the building stood at attention for the introduction of their new commanding officer, Ronald K. Harrison was going to understand, in front of every badge he had ever hidden behind, exactly who he had put his hand on. Sarah Collins had a habit of arriving before she was expected. Not early before the paperwork was filed, before the introductions were scheduled, before anyone knew to prepare a face for her. She had learned early in her career that a city showed you its truest self when it didn't know it was being watched. So on the afternoon before her first official day, she laced up her scuffed sneakers, pulled on the worn olive jacket, and walked out into Meridian City with nothing on her but a phone, $20, and 19 years of knowing exactly what to look for. Delray Avenue told her everything within the first 3 blocks. She read it the way a surgeon reads a scan, not looking at the surface, looking through it. She noted which storefronts had fresh graffiti and which ones had cameras angled away from the street. She noted the teenagers who scattered when a cruiser rolled past and the ones who didn't bother anymore. She noted the woman on the bus stop bench who had been sitting there too long to be waiting for a bus. Meridian City's 7th District had the bones of a neighborhood that had once trusted the people paid to protect it. That trust had been hollowed out slowly over years, one incident at a time. She stopped at Harmon's corner store because she was thirsty and because corner stores always told the truth about a neighborhood's temperature. She pulled a water bottle from the cooler, nodded at the teenager behind the register who looked at her with the flat, careful neutrality of a kid who had learned not to read strangers too fast, and paid with a $5 bill. She was stepping back into the heat, cracking the cap, when she heard the cruiser pull into the lot behind her. She didn't turn around. She took the first sip. Ronald K. Harrison had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere, wasn't part of any training manual, but it had governed every shift he'd worked for 17 years with the consistency of a clock. You scanned the environment. You identified what didn't belong. You reminded it. He pulled Unit 7 Delta 4 into Harmon's lot with the engine at a crawl, the way he always did. Not because he was cautious, but because slow entry meant people saw you coming. Meant they had time to react. And how a person reacted when they saw the cruiser told Harrison everything he needed to know about them. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, one wrist draped over the steering wheel, reading the lot. Force of habit. Force of power. 2 kids on bikes who immediately found somewhere else to be. An older man loading groceries who kept his eyes down. All appropriate responses in Harrison's mind. All correct. Then he saw her. Olive jacket. Dark jeans. Water bottle. Phone. Standing near the entrance like she owned the sidewalk. Not even looking up at the sound of the cruiser. Not stiffening. Not moving. Just standing there drinking her water like Harrison's arrival was completely unremarkable. His jaw tightened. He knew this neighborhood. He knew its rhythms, its textures, its particular brand of submission. Everybody in a 4-block radius knew what a 7th District cruiser in a parking lot meant. You made yourself small. You made yourself readable. You gave the officer something to work with, a nod, a step back, a reason to move along without incident. She gave him nothing. No uniform on her. No deference in her posture. Wrong energy entirely for this zip code, in his estimation. Harrison opened his door and stepped out slowly, hitching his belt. Somebody, he thought, needs a reminder. It started with a parking violation that didn't exist. Harrison approached her with that slow, load-bearing walk and informed her that the vehicle parked at the curb in front of Harmon's A rusted Civic that belonged to nobody either of them knew, was blocking a fire lane and that she needed to move it immediately. Sarah told him, evenly, that the car wasn't hers. Harrison said that wasn't what he asked. Sarah said she couldn't move a vehicle she had no keys to. Harrison said she was being uncooperative. It took less than 90 seconds to get there from nothing. He grabbed her by the collar of the olive jacket, 2 fistfuls of fabric, and pulled her toward him with the full casual confidence of a man who had done this before and been handed no consequences for it. Behind him, 3 blue-shirt officers from the afternoon detail stood near their vehicles watching. Reeves stood 6 feet back, her hand half raised like she had started a sentence she didn't know how to finish. "I have done nothing wrong," Sarah said. Steady, clear, loud enough for every witness in that lot to hear every word. Harrison's open hand came across her face before she finished the sentence. The sound cracked off the brick front of Harmon's and rolled down Delray Avenue like something breaking. Reeves made a sound in her throat and went rigid. The 3 officers by the vehicles found new interest in the middle distance. A woman at the bus stop stood up and then sat back down. Sarah's head snapped hard to the left. Her lips split cleanly against her teeth and she tasted blood, hot and immediate. She stood still for a moment. Then she turned her head back and looked at him. Her eyes were not wet. They were not wide. They were the flattest, coldest, most certain eyes Harrison had ever had aimed at him in 17 years. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career," she said quietly. Harrison laughed. Short, dismissive, the laugh of a man who has never once believed the person in front of him. Sarah said nothing further. She simply filed it, the sound of that laugh, into the same precise place she had filed everything else. She would need it later. She would need all of it. Harrison invented the charges the way a man like him always did. Out loud, confidently, as though volume and certainty were the same thing. Disorderly conduct, obstruction, failure to comply with a lawful order. He recited them to the booking officer like a grocery list while Sarah stood at the counter with her wrists cuffed behind her back and her lips still bleeding, watching him construct the paper architecture of a lie in real time. The booking officer asked for her name. "Sarah Collins," she said. "Date of birth." She gave it. Address. She gave the hotel where she'd been staying since Sunday. Occupation. She paused for just a beat, the only pause she allowed herself all evening. Public sector, she said. It was not a lie. It was a door left deliberately, strategically unopened. They asked her to sign the preliminary intake form. She read it completely, which nobody expected, and signed only the fields legally required of her. Nothing more. She did not volunteer her badge number, did not volunteer her rank, her precinct assignment, her department credentials. Nothing that would cascade into a personnel flag before she was ready for one. Harrison was 3 feet away, still talking, filling the room with his own noise. He wasn't watching her hands. He wasn't watching her eyes. He had already decided she was handled. That was his second mistake. The first had been in the parking lot. They walked her down a corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and stale recycled air and put her in a holding cell at the far end. For concrete walls, a steel bench, a single overhead light humming at a frequency designed to wear a person down. The door locked behind her with a sound like punctuation. Sarah sat down, straightened her back, folded her hands, and began to watch everything. It was past midnight when Sergeant Yvonne Park ran the prints. It was routine, end-of-shift processing, the kind of administrative housekeeping that filled the quiet hours when the building settled into its nighttime version of itself. Fewer voices, dimmer energy, the particular stillness of a precinct between crises. Park was methodical by nature and clean by record, which in the 7th District made her something of an anomaly. 11 years on the desk. Not a single sustained complaint. She did her job the way it was supposed to be done, which was precisely why Harrison had never bothered to cultivate her and precisely why she had never been promoted. She pressed Sarah's prints into the scanner without ceremony, entered the booking number, and waited. The screen populated. Then it stopped. Then it flashed a restricted personnel banner in a shade of red Park had seen exactly once before in 11 years, when a federal marshal had been accidentally booked during a joint operation task force gone sideways. Park read the screen, read it again, sat back in her chair. She looked down the corridor toward the holding cells for a long moment. Then she stood quietly and walked the length of the hallway alone. She stopped at the last cell on the left and stood at the bars without speaking, the way a person stands when they are trying to locate the correct words for something that has no correct words. Sarah was already looking at her. She had heard the footsteps change. Park opened her mouth, closed it. "Not yet," Sarah said quietly from the bench. "In the morning." Park stared through the bars for another long moment. Then she nodded, once, slowly, the nod of a woman who understood exactly what she was being asked to hold and intended to hold it without flinching. She walked back to her desk, locked her screen, and did not leave her post until the sun came through the precinct's east-facing windows and the building began filling with the sounds of a new shift arriving. A shift that had no idea what was already waiting for it at the end of that corridor, sitting straight-backed and perfectly still, ready. Park came for her at 6:45. No announcement. No escort of additional officers. Just Park, alone, keys in hand, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided in the middle of the night exactly what kind of officer she intended to be and had spent the remaining hours making peace with it. She unlocked the cell without a word. Sarah stood, smoothed the front of her olive jacket, and followed her down the corridor. The district commander's office sat at the far end of the administrative wing, a room that had been empty for 6 weeks since the last commander's retirement, waiting for its new occupant with the patient indifference of institutional spaces. Park unlocked it, pushed the door open, and stepped aside. Against the far wall, exactly where facilities had left it per Sarah's written instructions the previous Thursday, hung a garment bag in black nylon. Sarah crossed the room and unzipped it without hurry. The dress uniform was pressed to a sharpness that could have drawn blood. Deep navy, gold insignia catching the early morning light at the window's edge, Chief Inspector bars aligned with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was its own form of authority. She had packed it herself before leaving Chicago, had smoothed every crease with her own hands. She changed slowly, deliberately, the way a person performs a task they have been preparing for without knowing it for 19 years. When she was finished, she stood before the narrow mirror on the back of the office door and looked at herself completely, without flinching. The uniform, the posture, the gold, and beneath all of it, the bruise darkening along her jaw, her lips swollen and split and healing in the way that wounds do when they are left to tell the truth. She did not reach for concealer. She did not adjust the collar to draw the eye elsewhere. She let it sit exactly where Harrison had put it, visible and irrefutable, because in 20 minutes it was going to be the most important piece of evidence in that briefing room. She turned from the mirror and picked up her hat. It was time. The briefing room held 61 officers at capacity. This morning it held 63, which meant 2 people in that room had no business being there. A detail Harrison would not register until it was already too late. He was in the 3rd row, right of center, coffee cup in his left hand, shoulders loose. He had slept without difficulty, which said everything about him that needed saying. He was already half checked out, running through the mental inventory of his afternoon patrol route, when the room was called to attention and the door at the front opened. The room snapped upright in the way rooms do when rank enters, a collective, instinctive straightening that moves through a crowd like a current. Harrison rose with it, reflexive, his coffee pausing at his side. She walked to the podium the way she walked everywhere, without performance, without hesitation, each step carrying the full weight of someone who had decided long ago that a room was never something you entered. It was something you claimed. The uniform registered first. The insignia, the bars, the hat carried correctly under her left arm. The 7th District hadn't had a chief inspector in 6 weeks, and the room was calibrating, adjusting, preparing its collective first impression. Then the face registered. The bruise along the jaw, deep and dark against her brown skin, precise in its location as a signature. The split lip, healing but unmistakable. The eyes, steady, dark, and moving with absolute deliberateness across the rows of officers until they found exactly what they were looking for. Harrison's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. The room didn't notice, but Sarah noticed. She watched the color leave his face in a slow, irreversible drain, watched recognition detonate behind his eyes, watched 17 years of untouchable certainty crack straight down the middle. She held his gaze and did not blink. She set her hat on the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds longer than was comfortable. Then she began. She did not begin with Harrison. That was the part he would never fully recover from, the understanding that she had not walked to that podium for him. She introduced herself to the district the way she did everything, with precision and without theater. She spoke briefly about her record, her expectations, her standards for the 7th District going forward. She spoke to 63 officers like each one was individually accountable. Because they were. Then she paused. "Yesterday afternoon," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without strain. "While conducting an informal assessment of this district in civilian clothes, I was approached in a parking lot on Delray Avenue by an officer of this precinct." The room shifted. Harrison's cup was at his side now, his hand no longer remembering it. "I was grabbed by the collar. I was struck across the face with an open hand. I was arrested on charges fabricated at the scene and processed at this station under a false booking premise." She let each sentence land separately, the way you set down stones. "The officer responsible is in this room." She didn't point. She didn't need to. 62 pairs of eyes had already found Harrison on their own. Officer Ronald K. Harrison. Assault. Civil rights violation. Falsification of arrest documentation. From the back of the room, 2 men in plainclothes stepped forward through the crowd. Unhurried, deliberate, badges already visible. Internal affairs. They had been standing there since before roll call. Harrison looked at them, and something behind his eyes went out like a light in a power cut. They removed his badge first. Then the weapon. Every officer he had ever silenced with a look watched it happen without making a sound. Sarah turned to the second row. "Officer Reeves." Dana Reeves went still. "You have a choice to make today," Sarah said quietly. "The truth will cost you something. Silence will cost you everything." The room held its breath. Dana Reeves stepped forward. The trial lasted 4 days. The verdict took the jury less than 2 hours. The prosecution's case was not complicated because Sarah had made certain it wouldn't be. The medical report documenting the split lip, the bruised jaw, the wrist contusions from cuffs applied too tightly. The booking records bearing Harrison's name on every line. Sergeant Park's testimony, delivered without embellishment and without flinching. Dana Reeves' full account, steady, detailed, and clearly costly to give, which made it impossible to dismiss. And the security footage from Harmon's corner store, exterior camera, unobstructed angle, timestamp intact, which Harrison had never thought to pull because it had never occurred to him that he would need to. It had occurred to Sarah. It had occurred to her while she was still standing in the parking lot. 12 years. Federal. All counts. At sentencing, Harrison turned in his seat and looked at Sarah for the first time since the briefing room. His voice, when he finally used it, had lost its particular quality of command. He told the court she had orchestrated the entire thing, that she had provoked him deliberately, that she had set him up. Sarah looked at him steadily from across the room. "You set yourself up," she said. "For words." She offered nothing further. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in November, Sarah Collins was sworn in as Deputy Superintendent of Meridian City, the first black woman to hold the title in the department's 93-year history. The ceremony was brief, which was how she preferred things. Her new office was large and faced east. She hung nothing on the walls except one photograph, small, unframed, fixed with a single pin at eye level near the window. The Harmon's Corner store parking lot, taken the morning after, in the early flat light before the city woke up. The pavement still marked where she had stood. She left it there to remind herself, not of what had been done to her, of what she had known even then she was going to do about it. Here is the outro for your story, modeled on the competitor's narrative flow but written entirely for your characters and world. In the end, it was never about the uniform. It was about the content of your character, what you do when nobody is watching, when the person in front of you has no power, no rank, no obvious way to fight back. Ronald K. Harrison looked at Sarah Collins and saw nothing worth respecting. That one decision cost him everything he had spent 17 years building. He is currently serving 12 years in federal prison, surrounded by the very community he spent a career tormenting, with nothing left of that badge but the memory of the day it was taken from him in front of every officer he ever silenced. Sarah Collins is still rising, because that is what happens when power is built on integrity rather than intimidation. It doesn't crumble under pressure. It compounds. So let me ask you something before you go. If you had been in that parking lot on Delray Avenue, if you had watched what Dana Reeves watched, what would you have done? Would you have been a Harrison, reaching for dominance over someone you assumed couldn't reach back? Would you have been a Reeves, frozen between conscience and fear? Or would you have been a Park, the person who quietly, without fanfare, chose the right side and held it until morning? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If the story moved you, hit that like button. It means more than you know, and it helps this channel keep delivering justice, one story at a time. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. And remember, nobody is ever really a nobody.